The rain was coming down hard that November night. Cold, heavy, the kind that soaked through everything. Officer James Hartley stood at his post outside Buckingham Palace, rifle at his side, eyes scanning the darkness. He had been a royal guard for 8 years. He knew the routine, the silence, the stillness, but tonight felt different. Through the iron gates, he saw movement. A figure walking alone down the path. No umbrella. No attendants. Just a woman in a dark coat, moving with purpose through the storm. James squinted. His pulse quickened. Protocol demanded he identify anyone approaching the palace grounds after hours. Then the streetlight caught her face. Princess Anne. James felt his chest tighten. The Princess Royal, walking alone at nearly midnight. No security detail in sight. No announcement. Nothing. He straightened his posture, mind racing. Should he radio in? Should he approach? Every instinct told him something was wrong. She stopped a few feet from the gate. Their eyes met. Hers were calm, steady. Not the eyes of someone in distress. Not the eyes of royalty expecting to be recognized. "Officer," she said, her voice cutting through the rain. "I need to get inside." Quietly. James hesitated. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't normal. But something in her tone made him move. He unlocked the side gate, the metal clicking softly in the night. She stepped through without a word of thanks. Just a small nod, and then she was gone into the shadows. James stood there, rain dripping from his cap, wondering what he had just witnessed. In 8 years, he had never seen anything like this. Royals didn't walk alone. They didn't appear unannounced in storms. They didn't ask guards to let them in quietly. Before you hear what happened next, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss where this story goes. The next morning, James reported for duty as usual. The palace buzzed with activity. Diplomats, staff, the changing of the guard. Everything normal. But James couldn't shake the image of Princess Anne in the rain. He asked a senior officer if there had been any late-night arrivals logged. Nothing, the officer said. Quiet night. James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Had he imagined it? No, impossible. He had spoken to her. Unlocked the gate. Watched her disappear into the palace grounds. 3 days passed. James said nothing more. He kept his post. Followed orders. But his mind kept returning to that night. To her eyes. To the way she had moved with such determination. Then, on the 4th day, he received a message. Report to the administrative office. Immediately, his hands went cold. Had he broken protocol? Was he being reprimanded? Dismissed. James walked through the palace corridors, each step echoing his growing dread. The administrative office was tucked away in the West Wing, a place where careers were made or ended. He knocked. Enter. James pushed open the door. And there, standing by the window, was Princess Anne. She turned to face him. And for the first time, she smiled. The room was small, plain, not the kind of place James expected to meet royalty. No gold frames. No portraits. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and morning light streaming through a single window. Princess Anne gestured for him to sit. "Officer Hartley," she began, her voice softer than it had been in the rain. "I imagine you have questions." James sat stiffly, back straight, hands on his knees. He had rehearsed a dozen responses in his head during the walk here. But now, facing her, the words stuck in his throat. "Ma'am, she raised a hand gently. "You followed your instincts that night. You didn't alert the entire palace. You didn't make a scene. You helped me when I needed discretion." She paused, studying him. "Do you know why I was out there?" James shook his head. Princess Anne moved to the window, looking out at the palace grounds. There was a situation. A young woman, staff member, in trouble. Personal trouble. The kind that doesn't make headlines but destroys lives quietly. Her voice dropped. She called me, not the press office, not security. Me. She was at a bus stop 3 miles away, terrified, with nowhere to go. James listened, the pieces slowly assembling in his mind. I could have sent someone, the princess continued. Could have made calls. Could have handled it the royal way. Proper channels. Official protocols. She turned back to him. But she didn't need protocol. She needed someone to show up. So I did. The simplicity of it struck James like a blow. A princess. Walking through a storm. To help someone most people would never notice. I brought her back through a side entrance and said, got her into temporary housing on the grounds until we could arrange something permanent. She's safe now. Starting over, she sat down across from James. And none of it would have worked if you had followed standard procedure that night. James felt something shift inside him. 8 years of standing guard. 8 years of watching royals come and go in limousines. In ceremony, in distance, he had thought he understood duty. But this was something different. Ma'am, I didn't know. That's exactly the point. And interrupted, but kindly. You didn't know? But you trusted your judgment. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped. That's not in the manual, Officer Hartley. That's character. She stood, signaling the meeting was ending. But James had to ask. The question that had haunted him for 4 days. Why alone, ma'am? Why not bring security? Princess Anne's expression changed. Something flickered in her eyes. Memory? Old pain, perhaps? She was quiet for a long moment. 20 years ago, she finally said, someone tried to kidnap me. Right here in London. Dragged me from my car. Shot my driver. My security officer. My lady-in-waiting. Her voice remained steady, but James saw her hands tighten slightly. I fought back. Refused to go. And we got away. James knew the story. Every guard did. The 1974 attempted kidnapping. One of the most dramatic royal security breaches in history. After that, Anne continued, everyone wanted to surround me with more guards. More barriers. More distance from the world? She looked directly at him. But I made a choice. I would not live afraid. I would not let violence make me less useful. So yes, I take precautions. But I also live by a principle. When someone needs help, you show up. Even if it means walking through the rain. She moved toward the door, then stopped. You did good work that night, Officer Hartley. The kind that doesn't get medals. But it matters. James stood as she left, his mind reeling. He had expected reprimand, maybe dismissal. Instead, he had witnessed something that changed how he saw everything. But what he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, James was assigned to a new detail. Personal security rotation for Princess Anne during a series of public engagements. He had never worked close protection before. Always perimeter. Always distant. But someone had specifically requested him. He suspected who. The first event was a veterans' hospital in South London. Nothing glamorous. No red carpet. Just Princess Anne, walking through sterile corridors, stopping at every bedside, talking to men and women who had given pieces of themselves in service. James watched from his position near the door. He had been trained to watch for threats. Scan crowds. Identify exits. But what he saw that morning was something else entirely. An elderly man, probably in his 80s, lay in the bed nearest the window. His chart indicated advanced dementia. The staff had mentioned he rarely recognized anyone anymore. Princess Anne approached, and James expected a brief greeting. A polite acknowledgement. What royals do. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the bed. Hello, Robert, she said, reading his name from the chart. I hear you served in the Navy Falklands. The old man's eyes flickered, confused. Distant Anne didn't rush. She just kept talking. About the sea. About ships. About the cold wind coming off the South Atlantic. Her voice was low, patient, like she had all the time in the world. And slowly, something changed in the old man's face. Recognition, not of her, perhaps, but of the memories she was gently pulling back to the surface. My daughter, he whispered suddenly, his weathered hand reaching out. Is my daughter here? Princess Anne took his hand. "She'll be here soon," she said softly. "But I'm here now. And I want you to know that what you did mattered. The country remembers." "I remember." The old man's eyes filled with tears. He squeezed her hand. And for just a moment, he was clear, present. Seeing James felt his throat tighten. This wasn't ceremony. This wasn't performance. This was a woman who understood that dignity didn't come from crowns. It came from showing up for people when they needed it most. They moved through 6 more rooms that morning. Each stop lasted longer than scheduled. The staff kept glancing at their watches, but Princess Anne ignored them. She listened to stories, asked questions, remembered names. When a young soldier broke down crying, overwhelmed by pain and medication, she didn't flinch. Just pulled a chair closer and sat with him until the tears stopped by the time they left. The schedule was 40 minutes behind. The press officer looked stressed, but Anne simply smiled. "They waited years to be heard," she said as they walked to the car. "I can wait an extra hour to listen." In the vehicle, James sat in the front passenger seat, processing what he had witnessed. He had served in the military before joining the Royal Guard. He knew what it meant to feel invisible after service, to come home broken and be met with polite thank yous that felt hollow. But what Princess Anne had done today wasn't hollow. It was real, and the veterans knew it. "Officer Hartley," Anne said from the back seat, breaking the silence. "You served, didn't you?" Before this, James glanced in the rearview mirror. "Yes, ma'am. Army. 3 tours." She nodded. "Then you understand what I'm trying to do." He did. For the first time, he truly did. The next event was scheduled for later that week. A charity gala, the kind with photographers and champagne and people in expensive dresses. James assumed it would be different. More formal. More distant. He was wrong. And what happened at that gala would test everything he thought he knew about courage. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble. Hundreds of guests in black tie attire filled the space, champagne glasses catching the light. James stood near the entrance, scanning faces, alert for anything unusual. Princess Anne moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. Standard event. Routine security. Then James noticed the young woman. She stood alone near the back corner, wearing a server's uniform. White shirt, black vest, tray in hand, but she wasn't serving. She was frozen. Her eyes were locked on someone across the room. A man in an expensive suit, laughing loudly with a group of business executives. James watched her face drain of color. Her hands started trembling so badly the glasses on her tray clinked together. She set it down quickly on a nearby table, turned, and headed for the exit. Something was wrong. James keyed his radio. Possible distress situation. Female server, southeast corridor. No immediate threat, but Officer Hartley. Princess Anne's voice cut through his earpiece. She had heard the transmission. "Follow her. I'll be right behind you." James moved quickly but carefully through the crowd. He caught sight of the young woman pushing through a service door. He followed, finding himself in a narrow hallway lined with supply closets and staff rooms. The woman was leaning against the wall, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. "Miss," James said gently, approaching slowly. "Are you all right?" She shook her head violently. Couldn't speak. Just kept gasping for air. Classic panic attack. The door opened behind them. Princess Anne stepped through, immediately assessing the situation. She moved past James without hesitation, approaching the young woman with calm authority. "Look at me," Anne said firmly but kindly. "Breathe with me. In through your nose. Out through your mouth." The woman tried to comply, struggling. Anne placed a hand on her shoulder, maintaining eye contact, demonstrating each breath. Slowly, gradually, the panic began to ease. The gasping slowed. The tears continued, but the terror started to fade. "What's your name?" Anne asked. "Sarah," the woman whispered. "Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah, I need you to tell me what happened. Who was that man in there?" Sarah's face crumpled. "My former employer, he hurt me." Months ago, I reported him, but nothing happened. He has too many connections. Too much money. She looked up at Princess Anne, desperation in her eyes. I needed this job. I didn't know he'd be here. I can't go back in there. James saw Anne's expression harden. Not anger. Something colder. More focused. Don't have to, Anne said. You're going to go home. With pay for the full evening. I'll arrange it. She looked at James. Officer Hartley, please escort Sarah out through the service entrance. Make sure she gets home safely. Ma'am, James began. I can't leave you. I have a full security detail inside, and interrupted. She needs you more right now. James wanted to argue. Protocol demanded he stay, but he saw the look in Anne's eyes. This wasn't a request. It was an order based on something deeper than protocol. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Anne squeezed Sarah's hand once more. You did nothing wrong. Remember that. Then she turned and walked back into the ballroom. James escorted Sarah out, got her into a car, made sure she had a number to call if she needed anything. By the time he returned to the venue 20 minutes later, something had changed. The atmosphere was tense. Guests were whispering. The man Sarah had identified was nowhere to be seen, and Princess Anne was standing near the exit, speaking quietly with the event organizer and what looked like a legal representative. James approached his supervisor. What happened? The supervisor shook his head, half admiring, half bewildered. The princess pulled that businessman aside. Privately, had a conversation. 5 minutes later, he left. White as a sheet. He glanced at it. Don't know what she said. But he won't be coming back to these events. James understood. Princess Anne had confronted him. Without cameras, without spectacle, just direct, unflinching accountability. Later, in the car returning to the palace, Anne was quiet. James finally spoke. Ma'am, what you did tonight was the bare minimum, she said, cutting him off. That young woman deserved someone to believe her. To protect her? That's not exceptional, Officer Hartley. That should be normal. But it wasn't normal. James knew that. In a world where power often protected power, what Anne had done was rare. Dangerous, even. She had made an enemy tonight, and she didn't seem to care. Word spread quietly through the palace. No official announcements. No press releases. But staff knew. The senior guards knew. Princess Anne had stood up for a server, had confronted a wealthy donor, had chosen conscience over convenience. Some admired it. Others worried. James heard the whispers. She's always been like this. Doesn't care about making people comfortable. Too blunt. Too stubborn. Doesn't understand politics. But James was beginning to see something different. Princess Anne understood politics perfectly. She just refused to let it override what was right. 2 days after the gala, James was assigned to accompany her to a rural hospital opening in Wales. Small community. Remote. The kind of place that usually didn't get royal visits. But Anne had insisted. They drove for 3 hours through winding country roads. No fanfare. Minimal staff. Just Anne, James, a driver, and one assistant. When they arrived, maybe 50 people waited outside the small hospital. Locals, farmers, elderly residents, children in school uniforms. Princess Anne stepped out of the car and immediately went to them. Not to the officials waiting at the entrance. To the crowd, she shook every hand, asked every child their name, listened to an elderly woman explain how far she used to have to travel for medical care. 20 miles, sometimes in snow, sometimes in emergencies. Not anymore, Anne said, gripping the woman's hand. This matters. You matter. Inside the hospital was modest, clean but basic. 12 beds. 1 operating room. A small pharmacy. Anne toured every inch, talked to every staff member. When she learned the hospital had struggled to get government funding, that it had been built primarily through local donations and charity, her jaw tightened. Show me the application records, she said to the hospital administrator. For the next hour, Anne reviewed documents. James stood nearby, watching her work through pages of budget requests, funding proposals, all denied or delayed. She took notes, asked questions, made phone calls right there from the administrator's office. By the time they left, she had committed to personally intervening. The hospital would get the funding it needed. In the car, driving back, Anne stared out the window at the rolling hills. "My father used to say that duty is the most important word in the English language," she said quietly. "I used to think he meant ceremony, appearances, doing what was expected." She turned to James. "That's not duty. That's just obligation. Real duty is showing up for people who have no way to demand it from you." James thought about his years in the military, about following orders, about doing his job. He had always equated duty with obedience. But sitting in that car, listening to Princess Anne, he realized duty was something bigger. It was about choosing to serve, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. "Ma'am," James said carefully, "can I ask you something?" She nodded. "After the kidnapping attempt, after everything you went through, how did you keep going? How did you not let fear win?" Anne was quiet for a long moment. The countryside rolled past. Gray skies. Stone walls. Sheep scattered across green fields. "I was terrified," she finally admitted. "For months afterward, every car door opening made me flinch. Every crowd felt dangerous." She took a breath. "But I realized something. If I hid, if I let that man's violence shrink my life, then he won. Not just against me, but against everything I was supposed to stand for." She looked at James directly. Service means being present, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, because the moment you retreat into safety, you stop being useful. And I refuse to be useless. James felt those words settle into his chest. He had seen combat, had faced danger, but he had never articulated it the way she just had. The refusal to let fear dictate purpose. They arrived back at the palace as evening fell. Anne thanked him for his work and disappeared into the residence. James went off duty, but he couldn't stop thinking about everything he had witnessed over the past weeks. This wasn't the royalty he had imagined when he first put on the uniform. This wasn't distance and ceremony. This was someone who had chosen every single day to be present for people, to show up, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. James went home that night and wrote something down in his journal. Something he would keep for the rest of his life. "I met royalty today. Not because of her title, but because of who she chose to be. But the biggest test was still coming, and it would happen in a way no one expected." It was early December. London was preparing for Christmas. Lights strung across streets. Markets opening in parks. The city had a rhythm, a warmth, despite the cold. James reported for duty at 6 in the morning. Routine day. Princess Anne had several engagements scheduled. A school visit. A meeting with a veterans organization. Nothing unusual. But at 8:15, everything changed. An emergency call came through. A fire had broken out in a residential building in East London. Council housing. Families trapped on upper floors. Emergency services were on the scene, but it was chaos. And Princess Anne, who had been scheduled to visit a nearby community center, heard the news. "Reroute," she told her driver immediately. "Take me there," her assistant protested. "Ma'am, this isn't on the schedule." "The press isn't there. And it could be dangerous. Then it's exactly where I need to be," Anne said. "Go." James sat in the security vehicle, his heart pounding as they raced through morning traffic. When they arrived, the scene was overwhelming. Fire engines, ambulances, police cordons. Smoke billowing from the 3rd and 4th floors of a 7-story building. Residents standing in the street, some in night clothes, children crying, elderly people wrapped in blankets. Princess Anne stepped out of the car and immediately went to the incident commander. "What do you need?" she asked. Not "what can I observe?" Not "what's the photo opportunity?" "What do you need?" The commander, a woman in her 40s with soot on her face, looked startled. "Ma'am, this is an active emergency, I understand. What do you need?" The commander hesitated, then made a decision. We're setting up a temporary shelter in the community center across the street. We need people to coordinate. Get families registered. Make sure everyone's accounted for, especially the elderly and children. I'll do it, Anne said. She turned to James. You're with me? For the next 4 hours, James watched Princess Anne work. She helped carry supplies into the community center. She sat with traumatized children, distracting them with stories. She held the hands of elderly residents who were confused and frightened. She organized volunteers, made lists, ensured everyone had food and water. No cameras. No press. Just work. At one point, an elderly man collapsed. Heart attack. And immediately knelt beside him, helping the paramedics until they could get him on a stretcher. Her hands were steady. Her voice calm. James realized she had medical training. Of course she did. When the fire was finally under control, when every resident was accounted for and safe, Princess Anne stood in the middle of the community center, exhausted, her clothes dirty, her hair a mess. A young mother approached her, holding a small child. The woman had tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to be here. But you were. You helped us. Princess Anne took the woman's hand. You would have done the same for me. That's what we do. We show up for each other. The woman hugged her. Right there. No protocol. No formality. Just two human beings who had survived something terrible together. James felt something break open inside him. This was what service looked like. Not standing at attention. Not following orders. But being present in the mess. In the fear. In the moment when people needed you most. They left as evening fell. The building was damaged but standing. No lives lost. Families displaced but safe. Anne sat in the car, silent, staring at her hands. They were shaking slightly. Ma'am, James said quietly, are you all right? She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw vulnerability in her eyes. Not weakness. Vulnerability. I think about that kidnapping attempt sometimes, she said. About how close I came to dying. About how random violence can erase everything in a moment. She took a breath. And I think about all the people who face that every day. Not from kidnappers, but from poverty, from neglect, from systems that don't see them. She wiped her eyes quickly. So when I get the chance to show up, to help, to be useful, I take it because life is so short. And what's the point of surviving if you don't use that survival to serve? James understood then why he respected her so deeply. It wasn't about her title. It wasn't about her wealth or position. It was about her refusal to waste her life on comfort and distance. She had been given privilege, and she had chosen to turn it into service. When they arrived back at the palace, Anne turned to him before stepping out of the car. Officer Hartley, I want to thank you. For these past weeks, for understanding what I'm trying to do, for not just following orders, but for caring. James felt his throat tighten. Ma'am, it's been an honor, she smiled. A real smile. Tired, but genuine. The honor is mine. She walked into the palace, and James sat there for a moment, processing everything. 8 years of service. 8 years of duty. But it was only in these past weeks that he had truly understood what it meant to serve. Later that night, James went home and wrote one final entry in his journal. Something he would share with other guards. Something he would carry for the rest of his life. I served a princess who taught me that true royalty isn't given. It's earned. Through courage, through presence, through the quiet decision to show up for people again and again, even when the world isn't watching. Princess Anne earned my respect not because of her crown, but because of her character. And that's something no title can give you. That's something you have to choose every single day to become. The next morning, James returned to his post. The palace looked the same. The routine was unchanged. But everything felt different. Because he had learned that the greatest act of service wasn't standing guard outside a gate. It was choosing, in every moment, to be present for those who needed you most. And that was a lesson worth remembering.